At just short of an hour and 22 minutes into the dark night, the Joker climbs from the wreckage of a flipped semi-truck on LaSalle Street, stumbles to his feet, firing once at the floor, before spraying bullets into oncoming traffic, attempting to goad Batman into killing him. The clown's motivations are a mystery, his designs uncertain. Neither money nor fame seems to appease him. And while it is clear that he is driven by some intense personal ego, perhaps he simply wishes to watch the world burn. It is clear that the Joker has a point to prove, and he is so devoted to his thesis that he would allow himself to die in search of validation. The bit that always stuck with me about Ledger's performance in this sequence was how little he seemed to care about his fate. Batman's abstinence from murder is a widely assumed limitation, but the Joker is testing this hypothesis upon himself, almost indifferent to the alternative. As an existential conundrum, the first of many contradictions in logic, experiments in philosophical thought, we are presented with a Joker who, whether you believe he deserves to die or not, seems to desire that outcome. And if the Joker expects to be killed, either to prove a point, or to otherwise end a lonely or miserable existence in an amoral world, then why not just do it? I didn't care for The Dark Knight when I first saw it. At 9 years old, I had some interest in superheroes in general, but Batman was not a character that I had any particular affinity for whatsoever. One of my first exposures to Batman came in the form of 1992's Batman Returns. Tim Burton's Gotham was gothic and macabre, but more than that, it was juvenile and perverted, with Michelle Pfeiffer cartwheeling in a skin-tight latex catsuit, pausing to lick Batman's chin and trade innuendos with DeVito's penguin.
Scented or unscented?
I'll come back later.
The image of Oswald Cobblepot choking on dark green blood that appeared so black it might as well have been tar, his lifeless body guided to the water of the Gotham City Zoo by a procession of emperor penguins, remained a beacon in my mind, informing any and all childish perceptions I had of this story and the universe that encompassed it.
Gentlemen, let's broaden our minds. Lawrence?
The other Batman films of the 90s were all recognizable to me for the same reason they were to the studios of the era in which they were produced. As villain origin stories.
Batman. Batman. Can somebody tell me what kind of a world we live in where a man dressed up as a bat gets all of my press? This town needs an enema.
It was Jim Carrey's Riddler who headlined Batman Forever. Schwarzenegger and Uma Thurman who usurped George Clooney. Batman was a cardboard cutout, one that lacked substance and existed only to foil the plots of cartoon thieves and tricksters. While these movies carried some entertainment value, the minor interest I had found in the character designs made little headway in giving me a reason to find an interest in the whole. I remember a sleepover with some of my youth hockey teammates where one of the other kids excitedly brought out their DVD copy of The Dark Knight. And I was so disinterested in the thought of having to watch it again that I practically begged the host's parents to call mine so that I could go home. Video games were introduced to me as an academic tool, but I was soon hooked on narrative single-player games, immersive experiences that tied the plot directly to the player's actions. Power fantasies dominated most of these games. The main character was silent or taciturn, sometimes guilty of mass murder, the slaughter of hundreds on their hands, But with rare exception, their actions during gameplay often went unacknowledged by both themselves and the larger story. I was first introduced to Batman Arkham Asylum as a PlayStation 3 demo in the tech department of a Walmart. Asylum wished to present itself as a horror story, set inside a dilapidated old mansion which had been repurposed to house the so-called criminally insane. Counting amongst its number a fear-obsessed psychologist dressed in a burlap sack engaging in chemical warfare, a pale green half-naked woman who could control plants at a molecular level, and a giant crocodile man who took to cannibalism just because he could. When the sequel was released, I had reassessed my earlier opinions on the Rogues Gallery, and was rotating through the character posters as cell phone backgrounds on a bi-weekly basis. In terms of aesthetics, I was finally dialed into the franchise's visual appeal. I was finally sold on the villains because I found their ingenuity to be a product of another contradiction. The Batman franchise is both broad and specific. Each of the villains works as a foil to an aspect of Batman's character, and each of them feels like a person who would exist in the context that Gotham provides. But each of them can be reduced to fundamental building blocks, and not everyone has to agree on what those building blocks are. Batman himself remained a cardboard cutout, one whose silence and minimal personality were disguised with cynicism and strict authority. As a video game character, some of these traits were common enough to be excusable, but the most unique aspect was in how the series intentionally drew the player's attention to Batman's aversion to death. In the third entry, a prequel, the Joker is once again shown to be indifferent to the loss of his own life. Batman's refusal to allow the Joker to die in a preventable way reformats the Joker's motivations, leaving behind his almost suicidal obsession with revenge in favor of forcing the Dark Knight to take a life. There is an existential crisis happening at the heart of the Joker's character, one that is driving him to oppose Batman not just in terms of the subject of life's sanctity, but as the subject of his own life's meaning. Why will Batman not just kill him if they both feel he deserves it? With Batman being the uncompromising vigilante, wishing to wage war on crime at all costs, beholden to no other rule besides the rule of cool, why will he not cross this line in particular? What is so valuable about the Joker's life that preventing his death could somehow be worth it? In the 8th grade, I created a project for National History Day that explored the Prohibition era. I earned a good grade on the project, but was prohibited from advancing to the regional competition, because one of the judges left the following review on my scorecard, and I quote, "Not enough Capone." So I will present to you now America's unhealthy fascination with organized crime.
I believe in America.
The Sicilian Mafia rose to power in the 1860s, following Vittorio Emanuele's Risorgimento, an overhaul of the Italian political and economic system that resulted in long-term immigration to the United States. The Italian mob works well as an allegory for the American dream, believing in hard work, determination, and greed, working their way up a corrupt corporate ladder in search of comfort, and finding only more competition. During the Prohibition and overlapping Depression era, the exploits of federal law enforcement's pseudo-war with the mob replaced an earlier fascination with the corrupt political machines of the century's turn. To paraphrase the Unabomber, The Industrial Revolution led to a societal overhaul of the economic classes, a status which gave rise to the modern system of publicly funded policing agencies. Sherlock Holmes popularized detective fiction, which in turn popularized the noir genre. Detectives dominated pulp magazines alongside adventure, action, and science fiction. When the radio became popular, the same stories were translated to a new medium, entertaining audiences with the defeat of the corrupt at the hands of the new, contemporary Robin Hood, the hard-boiled swashbucklers, and the red right hand of the legal system. After the 1931 Castellammarese War, a mob war which spanned the whole of New York City for several months, Lucky Luciano had Joe Massaria murdered during a game of cards, leaving the ace of spades unbloodied in his right hand. Shortly thereafter, Luciano's creation of the Commission made organized crime a legitimate national power, one that J. Edgar Hoover avoided engaging directly until their actions in the early 60s left him and the FBI no choice. Of course, this doesn't cover everything from the era. Foreign affairs and domestic politics complicate things beyond what can be expressed in a Batman pre-show video. But the point is that much of the superhero concept owes itself to the early 20th century ideas of crime and punishment. A time not even quite separated from our own, when deeper moral considerations were often dwarfed by the public's desire for clear definitions of right and wrong. By Y2K, the world was in a much different state. The government had begun leveraging advances in technology in its favor, and incrementally increased its ability to detect criminal activity before it had reached a climax. Today, the Mafia does still exist, but its capacity for direct control has dwindled significantly, owing in part to the government's more direct control over the privacy of the populace. Only 2 months after the collapse of the World Trade Center, President Bush signed the Patriot Act into law, granting the government nigh unlimited access to personal records and private information in the name of national security. Where the Mafia was motivated by greed, terrorism represents a form of ideological opposition. Fascism and communism represented existential threats, but as a consequence of their actions, usually in response to these threats, through global exploitation, proxy war, and economic corruption, the new opposition to American ideology was self-made, an existential threat that could only be combated at the direct expense of more individual liberties. While combating criminal activity, a new ideological problem arose, and to combat that problem, the government made compromises, crossing lines and continuing to justify those actions in the name of order and security. One might begin to see what types of metaphors we can find lurking in the shadows of Gotham. Batman: The Long Halloween deals with the transition of Batman's primary focus from traditional organized crime to costumed, ideologically focused supercriminals. At the start, Batman's war on crime has begun to make progress, having recently teamed up with Gotham's enthusiastic district attorney, Harvey Dent, to mount an assault on Carmine the Roman Falcone, the godfather of the city's mafia. Throughout the year, high-ranking members of the underworld are found dead, often on holidays, their corpses posed with seasonal paraphernalia. Batman makes use of the recently captured Calendar Man to help determine what the holiday killer's motivations might be, and the best method of tracking them down and putting a stop to their killing spree. With each passing holiday, Batman becomes progressively busier as Falcone turns to Gotham's freaks to maintain hold on his empire. and Holiday takes on the responsibility of disposing of Falcone, while Batman's focus turns to the likes of the Mad Hatter, Scarecrow, and Poison Ivy. By the book's end, Gotham is no longer a city controlled by the mob, but terrorized instead by the future infrequent inhabitants of Arkham. Falcone's decision to turn over control to the Rogues Gallery owes itself partly to the actions of the Holiday Killer, and partly to Batman's apparent effectiveness at tearing down the mob. Harvey Dent's fall from grace provides a persistently tragic element to Batman's backstory, representing the system that Batman initially wishes to work alongside, a system which he learns too late possesses its own internal corruption, which when probed, and finally externalized, manifests a Pandora's box of consequences that Batman will come to find is extraordinarily difficult to control. Batman's primary foil is the Joker, a character who only requires two traits: an ego, which all of these characters are subject to, and an antithesis. The Joker, in all his forms, rebels against any perceived authority. Whatever authority or absence thereof that you project onto the Caped Crusader, the Joker must exist merely to seek out the flaw in that authority. If Batman exists to fight evil and defend innocence, the Joker exists to illustrate Batman's confusion. Evil and innocence being subjective, Batman's pursuit is misguided and unattainable, and the Joker exists to confront him with the idea that all forms of control or attempts to contain humanity's chaos are flawed. Now, fundamentally, the Joker believes there is no point in anything. If Batman were to find himself rejecting rigid definitions of good and evil, the Joker, existing only as authority's foil, would regress to meet Batman's new source of authority. If, for instance, the only thing Batman finds to be true is that murder is wrong, the Joker would still exist to refute that claim. It is possible that you could see yourself agreeing with some aspects of the Joker's ethos. But because most versions of Batman do possess some form of no-kill rule, even if you find yourself agreeing with the Joker's rebellion against Batman's sense of justice, the Joker will always press against Batman's resistance to murder as well, which is often one of his sole redeeming qualities. In practice, the immortal nature of this relationship was first explored in Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, in which the Joker attempts to prove to both Batman and Jim Gordon that anyone can be driven insane if they experience just one bad day. A sequence of traumatic events capable of unraveling their faith in any of society's rules. Joker summarizes the yin and yang of this relationship with Batman through a joke in which two inmates are attempting to escape from a lunatic asylum, but find themselves unable to trust each other because they both believe that the other is insane. Batman finds the Joker's resistance to even the most basic of morals to be wicked, while the Joker finds Batman's opposition to be built on falsehoods. The tension between these two views has ultimately driven this relationship through the last several decades. The differences in portrayals of that conflict and the nature of both characters' viewpoints possess enough inconsistency that the audience is either forced to choose one particular interpretation or project their personal interests onto the basic premise. The Dark Knight requires us to take this fundamental conflict and project it onto a modern crime drama, calling our attention to two ideas that we wish to explore in terms of the individuals portrayed in the story, seeing how the feelings and actions of the Joker impact our faith in humanity, and our faith in the social structures humanity has built. The film primarily features 5 major viewpoints. Batman is an existentialist. The Joker is a nihilist. Both characters represent a lack of faith in the legal system. Where Batman desires to fight on the system's behalf despite its shortcomings, the Joker wishes to tear it down. But their ideological battle runs deeper than observations of governmental or societal social problems. Because the Joker doesn't just believe that the legal system is broken. He believes mankind's adherence to morality itself to be flawed. There's a thought experiment in ethical philosophy known as the trolley problem, which was devised in 1967 to help bolster an argument in favor of abortion. The true effect of the problem on our understanding of ethics is in recognizing that not everyone can agree on the answer. Whether you argue from a utilitarian, a deontological, or a consequentialist perspective, the lack of consensus means that not every individual will agree on a consistent definition of what is right and what is wrong. In other words, there is no pure foundation for morality, and no solid ethical theory on which everyone can agree. During the Joker's interrogation, it is professed that under pressure, people will throw their morality out the window and eat each other. The Joker believes that because morality is relative and lacks a foundation, there is little sense in pursuing it. As Lucifer might claim, God may say what is good and command us to do good, but what compels us to obey his tyranny? The Joker's goal for Batman is to get him to commit murder. No matter how contradictory Batman's actions may appear, to some degree, refusing to commit murder must mean that he believes in some sort of morality, that people are capable of change, or at least in this case, deserving of communal justice. The Joker doesn't believe that. Traditionally, the Joker thinks that living a life that adheres to moral rules is folly, and forcing Batman to kill someone is his way of dismantling even the most basic of ethical frameworks to prove this point. For everyone besides Batman, the Joker's goal is to force them to lose faith in the system, to tear themselves away from moral rules, and serve chaos as he claims to. Yet, like Batman, the Joker is a master of contingency, pretending to advocate for anarchy while maintaining control over almost all the situations he finds himself in. And this brings us to Harvey Dent, the film's flawed idealist who believes that the law must be trusted to maintain order. Dent's primary symbol, a two-headed coin, undermines this ideal, allowing him to operate under the illusion of trust in the system, while concealing a desire to remain in total personal control over the outcome of his actions.
You'd leave a man's life to chance? Not exactly.
Rachel Dawes serves as the story's optimistic realist, hoping the legal system can be patched up enough to remove Gotham's corruption, while reluctantly recognizing the utility of Batman in the city's current state. Opposite her, Jim Gordon is a pessimistic realist, willing to bend the rules without fully breaking them, working alongside both corrupt cops and vigilantes to pursue his sense of order. These last 3 characters represent different versions of faith in the law, and each of them serves to offer a perspective on the system and its perceived ability to work in society's favor. Gordon's inability to save Rachel from death represents the system's ultimate failure. Her passing allows Dent to completely lose faith in the ideals he hypocritically wished to profess. Batman, desiring to save Rachel, finds himself saving Dent instead. The failure of the system and Dent's disfigurement becoming a catalyst for Bruce Wayne's final transformation from man to symbol, the final pillar preventing Gotham from descending into chaos at the cost of what remained of his former self. Thus, while Rachel Dawes takes a central position in the love triangle between Dent and Bruce Wayne, one of the weaker elements of the film's literal narrative, figuratively, it may be more useful to view Rachel as the very personification of the faith in humanity that Batman refuses to give up on. In 1962, the murder of a 28-year-old bartender outside her apartment complex in Queens was sensationalized in the New York Times. The article in question claimed that over 30 witnesses were present for the crime, but that no one called the police or attempted to intervene. While hyperbolic, this incident was quickly popularized in psychology textbooks as an example of the bystander effect, in which individuals will remove responsibility from themselves if they assume that someone else will claim their responsibility in their stead. At the film's climax, the crew elects to distribute paper slips and allow the passengers to vote on their course of action. The results of the tally? 396 for, 140 against. When individual responsibility is removed, the group elects to save themselves and sacrifice the prisoners. However, in both cases, we see individuals struggle with the responsibility of activating the bombs, demonstrating the power that even the delusion of hope can have on the human psyche. The two thought experiments at the heart of this situation are the trolley problem and the prisoner's dilemma. The latter experiment is more directly applicable. Two parties are given a choice, which have the potential to result in 4 possible outcomes. The two options involving discord result in a positive outcome for one party and a negative outcome for the other, while the two options involving concurrence result in more neutral outcomes. The trolley problem is less obviously applicable, but by restricting the options in the prisoner's dilemma, the Joker has turned 4 possible outcomes into 3, making the decision more binary, forcing them to choose between action, murder, or inaction, death. Of course, we all know what we want. We want Batman to save the day. Why choose between action and inaction when the trolley can simply be stopped? Because no matter how much we debate amongst ourselves about wealth and motivation and attitude, the superhero always boils down to a situation like this one, where someone must be there to save the day and to literally stop the trolley, because there is no one else who can. Yet the dramatic irony falls straight into our laps when Batman falls short. And this will be an instance where the superhero cannot stop the trolley, and where we must actually make the choice to act or not to act. In real life, I'm not so sure what would happen here. Perhaps there is a vote, and we all choose to compromise on what it is we do. Perhaps someone with power gives an order, and perhaps someone else chooses to follow through. But the point here is not about what could happen. It's about what we want to happen. 2 individuals have thus far chosen not to activate the detonator, and I think we all understand why. It's not about what the prisoners want, it's not about what the civilians want, or what the Joker wants, or even about what Batman wants. It's about what we want, the audience. All the responsibility has been forced onto our shoulders. Because what do we feel in this moment? Should the man turn the key? And I think that's the trick here. Because if we all agree on what we want to happen here, then how can morality be a lie? Batman ultimately fails. Harvey Dent falls to his death, and Batman is responsible. The Joker has forced Batman to take a life. But Batman chooses to rebel against the Joker's ethos, proving that committing murder was not enough to validate the Joker's viewpoint that society will crumble at the revelation of authority's fallibility. However, this victory is hollow. In shouldering the blame for the actions of Two-Face, Gordon and Batman are advocating for Plato's noble lie, a societal order that owes its continued existence to a falsehood, traditionally observed by philosophers as a metaphor for religion, or as an exploration of society's allegiance to collective ignorance and corruption. We are forced to reckon with Batman as Gordon sees him, not a hero, but an anti-hero, a figure which society may not condone, but which must be utilized to ensure its own continuance, forsaking the nobility of the knight in shining armor for the depravity of the shadows, preventing the destructive outcomes desired by the Joker at the cost of Batman's intended symbolic status. Ultimately, the Dark Knight depicts failure and disillusionment, rejecting the Joker's outlook but leaving the argument unfinished, with Batman's choice to reward Gotham's faith rather than supply it with a potentially harmful truth, a somewhat ambiguous resolution to the question of morality. Batman's spirit may not be crushed, but if Batman can simply kill when it suits him to do so, then Joker's thesis on morality's fragility remains uncomfortably firm. Superheroes are not an exceptionally obvious conceit. If Clark Kent woke up one day, powerless, he would still seek to help his neighbors, rescue the cat from the tree, pull back the child who stumbled into traffic, and hoist the fallen victim to safety. Superman is a hopeful figure. The unbelievable idea that those with power could be inspired to use that power for good. As with Peter Parker and most other superheroes, it is Stan Lee's great power argument that compels them to play the savior role, believing their heightened capabilities and added advantage to provide aid give a greater weight to the value of inaction in preventable situations. But we currently live in an era that prefers the deconstruction of the superhero. Suggestions that a lone figure, perhaps even a team, acting as a savior, perceived as such by a population that relies on their actions to move forward, should be considered dangerous, fascist, or authoritarian propaganda, have been around for exactly as long as the superhero has been. The contradiction here is simply true. Superman can stand as a symbol of hope to some, and a troubling example of savior worship to others. As with all cyclic and recursive arguments, our focus is either too broad or too specific. The lens through which we view these characters presents the same problem with morality that the trolley problem presents. And this brings me to the point, finally. Why doesn't Batman just kill this guy? Often for Batman, there is a literal trolley to stop. There is no reason to choose between two lives, because death can simply be prevented. But in the figurative sense, choosing not to kill the Joker is a form of inaction, allowing the clown to go free, which inevitably results in more death and more pain. We all want the option that doesn't exist. It would be nice if the trolley were stopped. If that solution existed, we would all choose that option. And I think the argument that the Dark Knight makes here is that our preference for the option that doesn't exist is proof enough of morality's foundation. It is when we are cornered with a no-win scenario that things ultimately become strained. Batman is a series of contradictions, and the tension here lies between reality and fiction. Through the lived experience of almost 90 publication years, we are aware that the Joker has never permanently reversed his stance. We are often led to believe that the Joker is incapable of change, always willing to murder just for the fun of it, and always of the belief that life has no meaning. Conversely, Batman is always in rebellion against that stance, always willing to take the chance that the Joker will learn the error of his ways, insanely hoping for the trolley to derail, because realistically, that is a possibility, even if the constraints of the problem do not allow for it. Batman should not kill, because it is one of the few things that makes him legitimately interesting, beyond tragedy and drama. Sometimes motivating the tragedy and drama. Batman sits there, stubbornly telling us that morality is real, that the constraints of the trolley problem are simply that, constraints. Ones that do not refute an innate sense that life is worth preservation, and that the best case scenario, the ideal, would allow even the Joker to live and find redemption. To suggest that even the clown should one day be convinced that life has meaning is foundational to this series. The Joker, for whatever ideals he destructively claims to represent or to rebel against, must learn that his approach, and perhaps his whole ideology, is wrong. And until he comes to that conclusion, the Joker cannot be allowed to die.